If you're thinking about getting an allotment, or you maybe have already just been given the access to a brand new allotment, or maybe you've got an area of your garden which you've either neglected or you've had plans for to transform into a vegetable plot, then watch this video. This video is for you. In this video I want to give you 5 top tips of how to transform your new allotment, your garden, into a well-maintained plot that will help you to produce fruit and vegetables for many years. So if that's you, continue to watch. If you like this video, then give it the thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, then press the subscribe button and you'll be able to see future videos. So without further ado, let's get into it. Top tip number 1 is be aware and be prepared. Now, you don't know until you actually get involved with your plot how much time and effort you're going to need to spend on it, and that'll depend upon the condition that you get your plot in. Some of the plots that you may get may be overgrown. The plot I have that you can see behind me hadn't been worked for 2 years and it was completely overgrown. In fact, there wasn't a single area of available soil to plant anything in. It was in a fairly bad condition. And that took a lot of commitment for me to get it where I needed it to be. You may get an allotment which is partially like that. It depends if the previous allotment holder did much work in it or looked after, or how long it's been vacant. But you will get a variety of conditions of different plots. So what you need to do is be aware that you need to carry out a fair amount of work and give time to the plot to get it to where you want it to be. And even if you were to get a plot that was in really good condition, it's like when you go to look at a new house. Even if you go in a really well decorated house in really good condition, chances are you're going to want to make changes anyway, but into your style, to whatever you want. Well, an allotment is no different. You might have ideas about where you want to put things, and they might not be exactly where they are. So it very much depends upon the condition of the plot that you actually get. So being prepared is maybe doing a bit of research and making a commitment to spend time at the allotment, particularly in the early stages. Because the problem is, if you don't, what happens, it tends to get worse and worse and gets on top of you. Before making a commitment to have your allotment, make sure you do some research and you, in your mind, are committed to doing the work that's needed to get it where it needs to be. And if you can't commit to it, and that depends upon where you are in life, you maybe have a young family, you may be a little bit later in life, and you might have a busy work life, and it's just weighing up all those issues in relation to a balance that allows you to spend the time in the allotment and do all of the things that you need to do as well. Because on this plot here, I've seen people come and go. They've looked at programs like River Cottage and other TV programs and looked at it and think, oh, that's really easy. And they see a well weeded plot producing loads and loads of fruit and vegetables. But the reality is loads of work goes behind that. So when it's filmed, it's almost in pristine condition. It doesn't get like that by itself. Somebody had to do the work. So just be prepared to do a bit of research. And it may be that if you can't make that time commitment, then maybe it might not be the right time for you to have an allotment or to make a commitment to doing your garden. So that's top tip number 1. Top tip number 2 is, when you do get your allotment or you're looking at your garden for the first time, don't just dive straight into doing work. Actually survey the plot, have a look around and see what you're dealing with. Understand what is already there. That's the first thing to have a look at, because the plots will vary. They'll vary in size. You might have a half plot, you might have a full plot like my allotment here. You may have quite a large area of your garden that you've been looking at for a long time and might want to deal with that, or you may have a very small area. So the first thing to do is try and work out what you've got and have a look in, because as I said, my allotment was completely overgrown. It was just a mass of weeds and grass and all sorts of other things, and it was hard to see anything. So I had a look before I started digging around to see if I could see any plants or shrubs or fruit bushes or whatever, because they can die back during the winter. Now in my allotments there's nothing. It was pretty much a blank canvas for me. I could pretty much dig up and take away whatever I wanted. The allotment next to me, which was in a similar condition, I had a choice of that as well, but I didn't choose that one. But that had a line, when you look deeply in the grass, there was a line of rhubarb that was just poking out just above the grass, and also there was also some raspberries in there as well. And they're a useful thing to keep, either to cut everything around them and look after them and continue to cultivate them in their existing position, or to dig up and put somewhere else. One thing about allotment holders, they're very resourceful people and they make the most of everything they've got. So if you've already got something, what's the point in going out and buying more rhubarb or more raspberry plants in that example? So have a look around. You may have a plot that's got lots of maybe wooden raised beds that are maybe rotten, or there could be debris or anything thrown in an old allotment, and you've got to get that out and cleared first. So just by spending an hour or so just walking around, and you start to build up a picture in your mind about what you want to do. So that's top tip number 2, which is to survey the plot. Top tip number 3 is to have a plan. So now that you've got your allotment, you've done your initial survey, you've looked around, you've seen what's what, now you need to formulate a plan in your mind about how you want the allotment to look. So very early on in my allotment, I decided that I wanted to split my allotment into a number of beds, and the allotment's pretty big and I managed to get 12 altogether. That I knew I was going to do because I'd read all about things like crop rotation and the ability to grow different things in different places. So my plan was, when I first got my allotment, was to plot out where the beds were going to be, and you'll see some pictures with this video of how I did about doing that. I started in one corner and then went round and then dug the rest of the beds as I progressed. And as I dug a bed, I planted something in it as well. But I had a plan. And also as well, you start thinking about whether or not at some point you're going to have a polytunnel if you haven't got one on the plot, or a shed if you haven't got one on the plot. Those type of things are really, really important, because when you start to dig, you sort of know where you're likely to put things. So have a plan. Each year I draw out an idea of where I'm going. So I've got a spreadsheet which has got my plot numbers that I've dug. And I know I'll probably sit down in September or October and work out what's going to go in each bed compared to what was in there the previous year. I'll talk about the reason for crop rotation in another video, but it's actually quite important. So you need to have a plan. You need to have something in your mind that's going to give you an idea about where you want to put things. So that's really, really important, because the minute you start digging, that's when your allotment is starting to take shape from day one. So if you know what you're going to do, it makes it a lot easier. The other option is to do everything randomly, and I'm not a big fan of that. Just put things in wherever they need to be, wherever there's a space, put it in, and I'm sure that'll work for some crops and for certain allotments. But if you want to be organised, like I am, like my allotment is, you need to have a plan in place. And even though you might decide that you want a polytunnel or a shed in the future, you don't have to have one immediately. It's just that in your mind, you're thinking, well, if I am going to have one, this is where it's going to go. So make sure you've got a plan. You also need to think about what type of, in your plan, what type of things you're going to plant first. So if you're a new allotment holder, my advice is that you want crops that are going to grow fairly easily and rapidly. So when you dig a area of land, put something in like potatoes, you know, because they're a good crop to put in for the first time, and things like radish as well, which grow really, really simply. It just gives you that psychological boost when you start to see things growing. So you're digging and all that hard work you're putting in, but straight away you can start to see results because you've already planted crops. So have some form of a plan, and there's no reason why that plan can't change. And it continually does, but it's just a starting point so that you know what you're going to do with your allotment. So top tip number 3 is have a plan. Top tip number 4, don't make too much of a financial commitment too soon. Now, allotments can cost you money depending on what you need and what you want. So for example, if you want a new shed, then that could cost you anything to maybe 150, 200, 250 pounds, whatever cost it will be, depending upon the size of shed you want. If you want a polytunnel, that could cost you money. You know, you could end up going about really expensive equipment, netting, and all the things that you think you need in an allotment. Now, you will need those type of things, but my advice is that don't commit to buying them too early, because if you subsequently decide that actually it's too much of a commitment, it's not really what I expected, it's too much hard work, then you spend money that you didn't really need to. And again, as I said in one of the previous tips, is allotment holders and gardeners are very resourceful people. So most of the people who have sheds, for example, on this allotment, they've bought them along second hand from somewhere else. They're not brand new. And you can build a polytunnel relatively much cheaper compared to something you may have a company come in and actually install one for you. But there is a financial commitment to an allotment, and when you are in the first few weeks and first few months, just buy the essentials. What you will need, and what I suggest, and this is another tip you do not skimp on, is things like a really good fork, a really good spade, a rake. They're absolutely essential. Things like a wheelbarrow you can probably do without in the first few months, unless you know that you're going to keep your allotment, but that's a really useful thing to have as well. So the amount of money you spend up front is up to you, really. And again, I've seen people come onto the allotment and spent a fair bit of money putting in fruit bushes and trees, fruit trees, and only to find 6 months down the line that they've not renewed their contract. So my advice is then don't spend too much too soon on your allotment until you know you're committed. So that's top tip number 4. And finally, top tip number 5 is get started as early as you can or as quickly as you can. So after you get your plot, after you have inspected the plot and done your survey, get cracking as quickly as you can, because it's very motivating when you actually start to see things happening. If you don't do that and you know that your allotment is there waiting for you, the weeds are not going to wait for you. They're going to continue to grow regardless. They don't care that you can't spend those hours each week at the allotment. They're going to continue to grow regardless. But it's very motivating when you start to clear a bit of an area, you start to see all the hard work and the soil, and you start to put things in. It's very motivating. And a lot of people who have allotments, if they can really sort of, particularly in the first couple of months, really spend a fair bit of time at the allotment, they tend to be the ones that stay the course. They are the ones that will continue and stay on the allotments because obviously they are motivated by what they've actually done. So if you have got a brand new allotment and you've just got it, my advice is that get in there as soon as you can and just start clearing it and tidying it up and doing what you want to do. And here's a bonus tip. This is something that came to mind as I was recording this video. When you are starting to prepare the ground in your allotment for the first time, my strong advice is to think about digging the plot, which is really hard work, as opposed to using a mechanical cultivator such as a rotavator. A rotavator is a quick way of turning the soil over and giving you an area of land that you can plant in reasonably quickly. But the problem with the rotavator is if you don't dig out all the weeds before you use the rotavator, the weeds are still in the ground. So all the rotavator is actually doing is chopping up the weeds and putting them back in the soil. So within no time at all, if you use a rotavator and you have an area of land that's covered in weeds, those weeds are going to grow really, really quickly and probably overpower your crops. And I admit that digging the allotment is particularly physical. It's hard work, but I made that choice from the very beginning, that when I took my allotments on, I was going to dig it from back to front and get all the weeds out, and I did that. And you see some pictures in this video of the size of the weeds I removed from this allotment, and all I tend to get now are surface weeds that I can use a hoe and very little work to dig them out. So that's a bonus tip when you are starting to work on your allotment. Think about doing the hard work and digging, because once you've done that, most of those heavy weeds are going to be removed, and it will make your life a lot easier for the rest of your time on the allotment. So I thought I'd add that in because that's something I really remembered as a key part of getting my allotment the way that I actually wanted. So I hope you found those tips useful. If you've got any questions about this, or you've got any comments, then please put them in the comments bar below. And if you've got any ideas for future videos, then please let me know. So I'll see you on the next video, and all the best.